had to say and do horrible racist and bigoted things to sin. When Richard Widmark died at age 93 in 2008, Hollywood thought that was the end of the story. They were wrong. His daughter married baseball legend Sandy Koufax, and his second wife was Henry Fonda's ex-girlfriend. But the most shocking thing happened in the last few months of his life, and no one knew the real story until now. Richard Widmark was born on December 26, 1914 in Sunrise Township, Minnesota. His father, Carl Henry Widmark, was a traveling salesman with Swedish roots. His mother, Ethel Maybar, had English and Scottish ancestry. They gave him a mix of cultures, but his childhood wasn't settled. Because of his dad's job, the family moved around Illinois a lot. They lived in places like Princeton. Henry never stayed in one place for too long. Each move meant starting a new school and meeting new people, then leaving it all behind. This made him quiet and careful, and he learned a skill that would shape his future in ways he didn't expect. Movies were his way to relax. When he was 4, his grandmother took him to see his first movie, and he was hooked. By the time he was a teenager, horror movies like Dracula and Frankenstein had made a big impression on him. Boris Karloff's performance as Frankenstein's monster stuck with him. He was fascinated by how one actor could control an audience's emotions. He didn't know it yet, but that fascination was the first step toward his future. At school, he stood out. He went to Princeton High School in Illinois. He did well in school and found that he was good at public speech. After graduating in 1932, he went to Lake Forest College with he had no plans to become an actor until he was cast as the lead in Counselor at Law. It was unlike anything he had ever felt before. The stage felt natural, and the thrill of performing stayed with him long after the play was over. His focus changed, and by 1936 he had earned a degree in speech and stayed at Lake Forest as an assistant director of speech and drama. He had talent, but he also had to be determined, which luckily he had plenty of. Moving around a lot as a child made him strong, and he refused to give up. In 1938, he took a chance and moved to New York City. Radio became his entry point. He started with dramas like Aunt Jenny's Real-Life Stories, where his voice carried tension and emotion. His first major role came in 1938 on Aunt Jenny's Real-Life Stories, a popular 15-minute soap opera. His voice stood out. He was naturally good at radio because his voice was strong, smooth, and full of emotion. By the early 1940s, he was one of the busiest actors in the business, appearing on several shows every day. He played a tough-talking reporter in Front Page Feral and mysterious roles in The Shadow and Inner Sanctum Mysteries, keeping audiences hooked with thrilling performances. His ability to bring characters to life without ever being seen made him a big name in the business. At a time when most people were having a hard time making ends meet, Widmark was able to do it all. While Widmark's radio career was booming, the world was at war, and he wanted to join the military but was turned down because of a perforated eardrum. He then turned to theater, making his Broadway debut in Kiss and Tell in 1943. The play, a comedy directed by George Abbott and written by F. Hugh Herbert, opened at the Biltmore Theater on March 17th and was an instant hit, running for over 900 performances and ending in 1945. Widmark played Lieutenant Lenny Archer, a role that gave him the chance to show both. Widmark became a rising star in live theater with Kiss and Tell. The production also launched the career of Joan C. Field, who would go on to become a Hollywood leading lady. Even though he couldn't fight in the war, Widmark still found a way to help. He joined the USO and performed for American troops stationed overseas. The shows were unpredictable, and the soldiers in the audience often had just come back from battle. But Widmark took on the challenge. He learned how to adapt and keep an audience's attention no matter the setting by performing for the troops. Kiss of Death was Richard Widmark's big break in Hollywood in 1947, but it wasn't easy to get the part of Tommy Udo. At 32, Widmark had never been in a movie before, and he looked like a serious, almost academic stage performer, so director Henry Hathaway didn't think he was right for the part. Udo was supposed to be a crazy, unpredictable gangster who looked like trouble. When Widmark walked in, Hathaway immediately fired him because he looked wrong, with his blonde hair and blue eyes. But studio head Darryl F. Zanuck had a different reaction. He saw Widmark's screen test and noticed something strange about his laugh. It was an unplanned, nervous, high-pitched giggle that gave Udo an eerie, unhinged quality. Zanuck insisted Widmark get another chance, and when he walked into the audition room again, he knew he had to convince Hathaway. He ran his hand through his hair, flashed a wide, unsettling grin, and let Udo do the talking. Widmark got the part even though he was rated 4th overall behind Victor Mature, and Brian Donley. Widmark stole the show as Tommy Udo, who could be happy one minute and violent the next. The studio knew right away who the real star was and told theaters to use his picture to promote the movie, even printing wanted posters with his face on them. People couldn't take their eyes off of him. Widmark wasn't just playing a bad guy, he was redefining what a villain could be. Tommy Udo, always smiling, ties up an old woman played by Mildred Dunn in a wheelchair and pushes her down a flight of stairs. It was shocking. Audiences had never seen anything like it before. Because of the strict Hays Code, Hollywood had to be careful about violence, but Widmark's performance made the scene scary without having to be graphic. Critics took notice. Some even said Udo's crazy energy reminded them of early versions of Batman's Joker. The effect was immediate. Fans wrote letters asking Widmark to record his scary laugh onto blank photo discs. He became famous overnight. In 1948, he won the Golden Globe for Most Promising Newcomer. He was also nominated for an Academy Award for Best Supporting Actor, which is an amazing feat for someone who was just starting out in movies. He lost the Oscar to Edmund Gwenn for Miracle on 34th Street, but it didn't matter. The nomination was enough to cement his place in Hollywood. He didn't just play bad guys, he gave them personality and a sense of danger that made it impossible to look away. In The Street with Gnome, 1948, Widmark plays Alex Stiles, a cruel gang leader who works in the shadows of Center City. The movie is about an FBI agent who goes undercover to catch him, but Stiles steals every scene. Widmark had already made a name for himself in Kiss of Death, 1947, as the crazy Tommy Udo grinning. Alex Stiles, on the other hand, isn't just violent. He's also well-controlled, smart, and terrifyingly methodical. One scene shows how dangerous he is. He's talking to one of his men. He's not yelling or making threats, but every word sounds like a warning. That was Widmark's gift. He didn't even have to raise his voice to be scary. The way he walked, the way his eyes darted around the room, and the way his voice carried just enough of a casual tone made him scary. The movie is more than just a crime thriller. It's also a look at how the FBI used surveillance, undercover operations, and forensic science to fight organized crime in the late 1940s. But what stays with you isn't the investigation, it's Widmark's performance as Stiles. Stiles isn't just another gangster, he's a symbol of something bigger. In America after World War II, people were afraid of criminals who weren't just thugs with guns, but men who. After 2 years, Widmark played a very different type of villain in Night in the City, 1950. Harry Fabian is not at all like Alex Stiles. He is not in charge, he is desperate and always chasing a dream that seems just out of reach. He is a hustler, a man with big ideas, but no real way to make them work. The movie, directed by Jules Dawson, takes place in London's criminal underworld, where Fabian tries to make his plans come true, trying to start his own wrestling business, but right away he's doomed. He's in over his head, making promises he can't keep, and hanging out with people who are much more dangerous than he realizes. Widmark gives Fabian a frantic energy. He talks and moves quickly and always looks like he's about to lose everything. In one scene, he's pitching his latest plans so quickly that he almost trips over his own words. You can see the excitement in his face, but there's also a sense that he's about to fail. The Dawson's direction makes Fabian's world feel like a trap. London's streets are narrow and winding, and Fabian always feels like he's being watched. The movie builds up to one of the most intense chase scenes in noir history. Fabian runs through the city trying to escape his fate, but there's nowhere to go. He's not just being chased by gangsters, he's being chased by his own mistakes. At the time, critics didn't like it. Night in the City has been hailed as one of the best noir movies ever, and Widmark's performance is a big part of that. He makes Fabian seem real. You don't just watch him, you feel his desperation and hope against all odds that this time he'll get lucky, even though you know he won't. By 1953, Widmark was already a noir icon, but Pick Up on South Street, directed by Samuel Fuller, took his career to a whole new level. The movie puts Fuller in the middle of Cold War paranoia. He plays a thief named Skip McCoy who steals Candy's wallet on a crowded subway car. He doesn't know that the wallet contains microfilm meant for communist spies, so he finds himself in a tough spot between the government and enemy agents, both of whom want the wallet's contents. This is made clear in one of the movie's most famous scenes, in which an FBI agent confronts Skip McCoy. When the agent tries to appeal to his sense of duty, he just smirks and asks, "Are you waving the flag at me?" That one line says it all. He doesn't care about the bigger picture. He just wants to know how much he can get paid. But as the story goes on, cracks start to show in that tough exterior. He's selfish, but he's also smart. He knows how to play people and play a situation, and he does have everything in the movie feels raw and real thanks to Fuller's direction. Doesn't have the polished look of big-budget Hollywood movies. It's rough, gritty, and tense. Thelma Ritter's performance as Mo Williams, an aging informant who sells information to stay alive, is one of the most heartbreaking parts of the movie. She and Skip are both doing whatever they can to get by, but while Skip still has a chance to change, Mo knows there's no way out for her. Mo produces a chance to. Ritter was nominated for an Academy Award for her performance, and her scenes with Widmark added emotional depth to the story that made it more than just a Cold War thriller. Pickup on South Street was a big hit, even though it was made on a small budget. It won the Bronze Lion at the Venice International Film Festival and was later added to the National Film Registry for its cultural significance. But most importantly, it cemented Widmark's place in film history. With these three movies, he showed that noir wasn't just about crime, it was about people, men who were trapped, men who were desperate and thought they could trick fate, but they could never do it. Richard Widmark started his career playing bad guys, but in the late 1000s, 940s, Hollywood changed that because they saw they wanted to change his image. And Down to the Sea in Ships, 1949, was the first movie that did this. Widmark played Dan Lunsford, the first mate on a whaling ship. Unlike the violent characters he was known for, Lunsford was a college-educated officer who had to prove himself to an older sea captain. The young grandson of the captain, played by Dean Stockwell, was also on board, and it was up to Lunsford to teach the boy. At first he refused, saying he didn't want to teach, but as the trip went on, he earned the respect of both the captain and the crew. The movie had many high-stakes scenes, such as dangerous whaling expeditions and a dramatic scene where the ship got stuck in ice. But at its core, it was about growth and leadership. Widmark gave a performance that showed a different side of him. Fox took a chance by making him a hero, but it paid off. The movie was a hit, showing that he could play a lead role. 2 years later, in The Frogmen, 1951, Widmark played Lieutenant Commander John Lawrence, the leader of an underwater demolition team, UDT, which was like the Navy SEALs, but more dangerous. These elite units were very important in World War II, clearing underwater obstacles and going on dangerous reconnaissance missions before the war. The story followed Lawrence as he took charge of a team that was still grieving the loss of their previous leader. The men didn't trust him at first, but as the mission went on, he proved himself through sheer determination and tactical skill. The film was one of the first serious depictions of underwater combat in Hollywood, and the U.S. Navy worked closely with the production to make sure it was accurate. The impact went beyond the screen, as many future Navy SEALs, including Richard Marino, the first commanding officer of SEAL Team 6, named The Frogman as their inspiration. The movie was nominated for 2 Academy Awards, one for cinematography and the other for screenplay. Widmark's performance gave the movie weight by showing not only physical courage, but also the pressure of being a leader in a life-or-death situation. That same year, Widmark played another military role in Halls of Montezuma. This time, he was Marine Lieutenant Carl A. Anderson, a battle-hardened officer leading his platoon in a brutal campaign on a Pacific island. Unlike many war movies of the time, Halls of Montezuma was not overly dramatic. The movie was a rare and honest look at the mental and physical strains of war. Anderson had crippling migraines from stress, which meant he had to take painkillers just to function. His mission was clear: capture Japanese prisoners to get information on hidden rocket positions. But every step forward came at a cost. The platoon lost a lot of people, including Anderson's close friend Doc, played by Carl Malden. The movie used real combat footage from World War II to add to its authenticity. The movie wasn't just another war movie, it was used to recruit people for the Marine Corps and raise money for veterans. Widmark's performance as Anderson, a leader under a lot of stress, was one of his most memorable. In Don't Bother to Knock, 1952, Widmark moved away from war movies and played a different kind of tension. He played airline pilot Jed Towers, who was staying at a New York hotel, and met Nell Forbes, played by At First. Towers was drawn to Marilyn Monroe, the troubled babysitter whose crazy behavior turned the night into a nightmare. As Monroe's behavior got worse, the story turned into a gripping psychological thriller. Monroe gave one of her most intense performances, and Widmark's grounded presence made the rising tension feel even more real. Unlike his previous roles as a soldier or a leader, Towers was just an ordinary man caught in a scary situation. The movie showed that Widmark could handle complex roles. Richard Widmark made a name for himself by playing intense and complicated characters. He was especially memorable in westerns, where he gave roles that could have been simple bad guys or heroes more depth. One of his best performances was in Yellow Sky, 1948, a story about survival, greed, and redemption. Gregory Peck played James Stretch Dawson, the leader of a gang that robs a bank and runs away across the harsh Death Valley desert. They are desperate for water and shelter and come across a prospector and his tough granddaughter live in a ghost town. Ann Baxter Widmark played Dude, a smart and dangerous gang member whose instincts make him both a threat and a wild card. The film's cinematography by Joseph McDonald captured the desolation of Death Valley with striking images. The vast emptiness made the gang's struggle feel even more desperate. The ghost town itself became part of the story, showing the moral crossroads the characters faced. Widmark had only been in Hollywood for 2 years, but he was able to hold his own with more experienced actors like Peck and Baxter. Unlike his usual high-energy villain roles, he played a guy with a more controlled menace, showing that he had range. Behind the scenes, Yellow Sky had its own problems. Gregory Peck did a lot of the film with a broken ankle, but he didn't let it slow him down. To make the ghost town feel real, the production crew A-Team tore down an old Western movie set, giving the place a real sense of decay. The story was loosely based on Shakespeare's The Tempest. It wasn't just another Western, it was a character-driven drama with deep themes. 10 years later, Widmark starred in Warlock, 1959, a Western that explored law and morality and redemption. He played Johnny Gannon, a former criminal who tries to leave his past behind by becoming a deputy sheriff. The town of Warlock is overrun by violence and the people are desperate, so they hire Clay. Henry Fonda played the famous gunfighter Blasdell, who is known for being very violent. Widmark's character is torn between two worlds. He understands how criminals think, but he believes in upholding the law instead of using fear to get justice done. This puts him at odds with Blasdell, who thinks the law is weak and ineffective. Anthony Quinn played Blasdell's fiercely loyal but troubled friend Tom Morgan. Quinn's presence added another layer of tension, making the story as much about Warlock was set in Utah's rough landscapes and had a grand visual style that matched its complicated story. Instead of focusing on action, it looked at what justice meant in a world that was changing. Widmark's performance as Gannon, a man struggling with his past while trying to build a better future, stood out because of the quiet intensity he brought to the role. Widmark's Western legacy continued with the Alamo 1960, in which he played Jim Bowie in John Wayne's epic retelling of the famous Battle of 1836. Bowie, Wayne as Davy Crockett, and Lawrence Harvey as Colonel William Travis were some of the most important people in defending the Alamo. Bowie was portrayed by Widmark as a man torn between logic and honor. At first, he didn't think the Alamo was worth defending because he thought its location made it impossible to hold. But over time, Travis's determination and Crockett's charm won him over, and he chose to stay and fight even though he knew the odds were against them. The production of the Alamo was just as good. John Wayne had planned to cast Widmark as Davy Crockett while directing the movie from behind the camera, but budget issues meant he had to play the lead role himself. Widmark got used to playing Bowie and gave a performance that was both tough and emotional. The film's production was huge, and Wayne paid for a lot of it himself when United Artists refused to cover rising costs. This put him in a lot of debt until 1971, when sales of television rights finally helped him get out of it. The Alamo got mixed reviews. It was banned in Mexico because it showed too much patriotism in the Mexican army. It was nominated for 7 Academy Awards and won 2 for Best Sound and Best Cinematography. Widmark's performance as Bowie was one of its highlights. He made him seem real instead of making him into a larger-than-life hero. As the 1960s went on, Widmark took on more dramatic roles outside of the Western genre. In Judgment at Nuremberg, 1961, he played the movie, directed by Stanley Kramer, was about a U.S. prosecutor named Colonel Tad Lawson who was looking for justice against Nazi war criminals. It asked the question of who was responsible. Were these men just doing what they were told, or were they guilty of their own crimes? Widmark's character was unwavering, making an angry opening statement that set the tone for the whole movie. His performance showed how frustrated he was as a man who had seen the horrors of war and wouldn't let the guilty go free. The movie was full of stars: Spencer Tracy, Burt Lancaster, and Marlene Dietrich. It wasn't just a courtroom drama, it also asked deep moral questions about justice after the war. Widmark's role was different from his westerns, but it showed he could handle strong dramatic roles. In 1957, Widmark produced Time Limit, a military courtroom drama that asked questions about loyalty and survival. He played Colonel William Edwards, a lawyer who was looking into whether a P had worked with the enemy while being held in Korea. The film asked, it was a tense, thought-provoking story, and Widmark's performance made people question their own morals. By the early 1970s, Widmark was acting in TV shows. In Madigan, 1972, he played Detective Dan Madigan, a tough New York cop. The show was based on a 1968 movie in which his character died, but for the series he was brought back and reimagined as working in Chicago instead of New York. Traveled to cities across Europe like Lisbon and London to solve crimes. The show had high production values and each episode was 90 minutes long, but critics said it lacked the gritty spirit of the original movie. Even though it finished in the top 30 of Nielsen's ratings, Madigan was canceled after one season.